The alarm had already been screaming for 9 seconds when Sergeant Lena Ward hit the floor of her quarters running. She did not pause to check the time. She did not pause to look out the small porthole beside her bunk. She had been on Outpost KL7 for 11 months, and in those 11 months, she had memorized every sound the station made, every tone, every frequency, every particular rhythm of the alert system. This alarm was not a drill. It was not a pressure warning or a docking notification, or the soft 2-pulse signal that meant an unscheduled supply transport had arrived early. This was the 3-burst high signal, the one she had read about in the station's emergency protocol manual on her very first day aboard, the one described in flat, official language as reserved for imminent external threat. She pulled on her tactical vest as she moved, sealing it by touch in the dark, not needing light for something her hands had done so many times that the motion lived in her muscles rather than her mind. Her sidearm came off the wall mount and into the holster in a single practiced sweep. She clipped the emergency communicator to her left shoulder, checked the charge on the earpiece with a quick press of her thumb, and was out the door in under 40 seconds from the moment the alarm started. The corridor outside was already showing the effects of the alert. Lights had shifted from their standard warm amber to the cooler blue-white of emergency mode. The few beings she passed were moving quickly, faces tight with an expression she recognized across every species she had encountered out here. The focused, contained expression of people who know something is wrong and are trying to find out exactly how wrong before they decide what to do about it. She moved past them, going in the opposite direction from the flow of civilians heading toward the shelter areas. She was heading toward the observation deck and the sensor room, because the first thing she needed was information, and the second thing she needed was a position from which she could see the full picture before anyone started making decisions based on partial data. Outpost KL7 was not a large station. It had been built 30 years ago as a commercial waypoint, a refueling and trading post at the junction of 2 outer rim trade routes, and it had grown from that original purpose in the messy, organic way that useful places grow, adding sections as they were needed, extending corridors, expanding docking capacity, adding a medical bay here and a second commercial ring there, until the station was a functional, if not particularly elegant structure that housed approximately 260 beings at any given time. Most of them were civilians. Traders, technicians, administrative staff, a rotating team of coalition diplomatic personnel. The non-human species present were a mix that reflected the outer rim's particular demographic reality. A significant number of Sulkai, who ran the commercial operations with the quiet efficiency that was the most consistent feature of their culture. A smaller group of Valorians, patient and careful and deeply observant. And the Dreth, who managed the station's technical infrastructure with the complete focus they gave to everything they considered their responsibility. And then there was Lena Ward, one human being, assigned to KL7 as part of the Terran Confederacy's first formal participation in Coalition Outer Rim diplomatic protocols. She had been given the title of liaison officer, a rank that translated awkwardly from Confederacy military structure to Coalition diplomatic language, and meant, in practice, that she was expected to attend meetings, represent human interests in routine administrative matters, and serve as a point of contact for any Confederacy vessels passing through the sector. Nobody had said anything about this. She reached the sensor room and pulled the door open. Inside, Olin was already at his station. The Dreth technician who managed KL7's communications and sensor systems was a compact, precise being who Lena had spent a considerable number of hours working beside over the past 11 months, and she had come to read his posture the way she read everything she spent enough time around, carefully and with attention to detail. Right now his posture said that he had been awake for at least 30 minutes before the alarm sounded, which meant he had seen something on the passive sensors and had been watching it develop. "What is it?" she said. He did not look up from his screens. Krath, Predator-class warship. It came out of faster-than-light travel approximately 41 minutes ago, at a distance of 1,200 kilometers. I have been monitoring its approach since the transition. Lena looked at the main display. The Krath ship was visible on the sensor overlay, a dense, dark signal moving against the quieter background scatter of ordinary space. The read on its approach vector was clear enough. It was not following a standard commercial approach path. It had not hailed the station. It had not activated any of the standard identification transponders that Coalition vessels were required to run when approaching a populated facility. "Active weapons?" she asked. "Weapons arrays have been in active ready status since I first detected it," Olin said. "It has not powered them down at any point in the approach." "Speed?" "It decelerated approximately 16 minutes ago. It is holding at current distance now, 680 kilometers." She studied the display. A Krath Predator-class warship at active weapons status, holding position at 680 kilometers, not hailing, not identifying. She had read the intelligence files on Krath approach patterns well enough to know that this was not ambiguous. This was deliberate. The ship was positioned close enough to be a clear statement of presence and capability, far enough back to allow for communication before action, in the specific middle distance that the Krath used when they wanted to give a target time to understand its situation before the next phase began. "How long before they hail?" she asked. "Based on the approach pattern, I estimate they will initiate contact within the next 12 to 20 minutes, Olin said. He paused. "If they intend to hail at all." She heard what he left unsaid. Some Krath approaches did not include a communication phase. Some of them moved directly from positioning to action. The hail was a courtesy extended when the Krath wanted something that required the target's participation. When they did not need participation, they did not bother with communication. "I need to send a signal," she said. He looked at her then. His large, dark eyes moved from his screens to her face, and held there for a moment. "To whom?" "Terran Confederacy Emergency Channel. There is a patrol vessel, the Carver, that was running a route through this sector. Last reported position put it approximately 4 hours out at standard speed. Maximum approach would cut that to around 3 hours and 40 minutes. Olin was quiet for a moment. "The Station Council has not authorized a signal." "The Station Council does not know about this yet," she said. "The Amber Alert went out 15 minutes ago, and the Council will be assembling in the next 10 minutes. By the time they convene and discuss and agree on a course of action, we will already be in the communication phase with the Krath, and the question of whether to signal for support will have answered itself in a way nobody is going to like." He held her gaze. She met it steadily. She had learned, in the months they had worked together, that Olin valued precision and accuracy above nearly everything else. He did not respond to pressure or urgency as direct arguments. What he responded to was logic presented clearly. "If I send the signal now," she said, "and the Krath's purpose turns out to be benign, the Carver receives a false alarm. The Council is irritated with me for acting outside my authority, and I apologize and accept whatever formal consequence is appropriate. If I do not send the signal now, and the Krath's purpose is not benign, we have 3 hours and 40 minutes less of response time than we could have had. One of those outcomes is recoverable. The other one may not be." Olin looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to his panels. "Tell me the signal content," he said. She composed it quickly. "Krath warship, Predator class, active weapons, holding at 680 kilometers. Approach pattern consistent with pre-collection positioning. Station status, 260 civilians. No current military capacity beyond 1 Confederacy liaison officer. Requesting immediate response." She gave the station coordinates, the Krath ship's last sensor position, and the timestamp. Olin transmitted it. The confirmation came back in under 3 seconds. The signal was away. She let out a breath she had not been aware of holding. "Thank you," she said. He did not acknowledge it. He was already back to monitoring his screens, adjusting sensor parameters, cross-referencing approach data with the station's historical records. This was how Olin worked. He found a task, and he completed it, and he moved to the next task, without drama and without delay, and it was one of the things Lena had come to genuinely respect about him. She pulled a chair to a position beside his station, where she could see the main display, and settled in to wait. The next 18 minutes were very quiet. The Krath ship held its position. It did not move closer. It did not power down its weapons. It did not hail. It simply sat at 680 kilometers and existed, in the way that very large and very confident things exist, without needing to do anything more to communicate their presence. Around the station, Lena knew, the population was in various states of response to the Amber Alert. The shelter areas would be filling with civilians. The Council would be convening. Ambassador Lease, The senior Sulkai diplomat who served as KL7's highest-ranking official, would be receiving briefings and trying to construct a response plan with the information she had, which was at this point incomplete. Lena had been in briefings with Lise many times over the past 11 months. She respected the ambassador considerably. Lise was intelligent, careful, and deeply experienced in the kind of multi-species diplomacy that was the coalition's daily operational reality. She was also, Lena had observed, shaped by a framework of assumptions about the Krath that had been built over 300 years of Sulkai interaction with them, a framework that treated the Krath as an immovable feature of the political landscape, like a mountain range or a weather system, something to be navigated around rather than engaged with directly. That framework had kept the Sulkai alive through 3 centuries of Outer Rim politics. It had also cost them considerably, in tribute and concession, and the slow erosion of any position that the Krath found inconvenient. Lena was thinking about this when the Krath ship finally moved. Not toward the station. It adjusted its position laterally, a relatively small movement that nonetheless changed its orientation relative to the station, in a way the sensors could not miss. It was now presenting its forward aspect directly toward KL7. Every major weapons system it carried was now pointing in one direction. "They are hailing," Olin said. The signal came through on the main channel, broad spectrum, and the station's translation system engaged immediately. The voice that came through was deep and carried a resonance that Lena felt as much as heard, a quality that went below auditory processing and touched something older. "This is Captain Vorak, of the Krath vessel Merith. I am here to collect this station's tribute. You will prepare a list of available materials and personnel for my inspection. I will send a boarding team within the hour. Failure to comply will be treated as a refusal, and refusal will have consequences. No greeting, no identification request, no acknowledgement that the station had its own systems of governance, or that there was a formal protocol for this kind of encounter. Just the statement, flat and complete, in the tone of someone reading a function off a list of tasks that have already been decided." Lena looked at the main display. On it, the Krath ship held its position, its forward weapons arrays pointed directly at KL7, patient and still. She stood up from the console. "Where are you going?" Olin asked. "To the receiving bay," she said. "The boarding team will arrive within the hour. I want to be there when they do. The council has not yet." "I know," she said. "I am not waiting for the council." She was already out the door. The corridor felt different now. The Amber Alert was still cycling, but there was a quality to the station's atmosphere that had shifted, something in the way the remaining visible crew members were moving, the tightness in the spaces between people. The Krath's hail had gone out on the main channel. Everyone with a speaker or a terminal had heard it. The word tribute had been spoken, and in the Outer Rim, that word carried a specific weight, a specific history, a specific quality of dread that had been built up over 400 years of the same pattern, playing out across dozens of stations and outposts and small colonies. Lena had read the history. She knew the pattern. She also knew something about patterns, which was that they only continued as long as every participant in the pattern kept playing their role. She had not come to KL7 to play a role that someone else had assigned her. Ambassador Lise intercepted her at the junction of the main corridor and the passage leading to the receiving bay. The Sulkai diplomat was wearing her formal robes, the deep blue ones she kept for significant occasions, and her luminescent skin was cycling at a frequency that Lena had learned to associate with controlled anxiety, the effort of keeping emotional response from interfering with function. "Sergeant Ward," Lise said, "I need you to come to the council chamber first. We need to discuss our response before anyone proceeds to the receiving bay." "With respect, Ambassador," Lena said, "the boarding team will arrive within the hour. The Krath do not wait for internal discussions. I understand that, which is why we need to be brief and effective." Lise looked at her with an expression that was complex and careful. "I have been in negotiations with the Krath before. I know how this goes. The Council's position will be to offer what they ask for, reduce it where possible through negotiation, and send them on their way without escalation. It has worked before. It has kept the station intact before," Lena said. "Those are not the same thing." Lise was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant, I am responsible for the lives of 260 people on this station." "So am I," Lena said. And I think we disagree about what protecting those lives requires right now." They looked at each other for a long moment, in the blue-white emergency lighting of the corridor. Lys's luminescence flickered very slightly. Lena held her ground. "What are you planning to do?" Lys asked. "I am planning to be present when the boarding team arrives," Lena said. "I am planning to stand where they can see me, and where I can see them. I have already sent an emergency signal to the Carver. It will be here in approximately 3 hours and 30 minutes. The Krath captain does not know that yet." Lys stared at her. "You sent a military signal without council authorization." "I sent a Confederacy emergency signal under Confederacy protocols," Lena said. "My first obligation is to those protocols. My secondary obligation is to the coalition council structure. The primary obligation took precedence." "That is a very convenient interpretation." "It is an accurate one," Lena said. She softened her voice slightly. Not the content, but the delivery. Because Lys was not an adversary, and this was not the moment for a confrontation between the two of them. "Ambassador, I am not trying to override you. I am trying to give us a position from which there is something to negotiate. Right now, the Krath see an undefended station with a frightened population and no meaningful ability to change their outcome. If the only thing between what they want and what they take is our willingness to give it to them, they will take everything. But if there is something else in the room, some variable they have not fully accounted for, that changes the calculation. I am the variable." Lys looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, "What kind of variable?" "An unexpected one," Lena said. "Which is the only kind that works." Another long pause. Then Lys turned and walked toward the receiving bay. Not quickly, with the careful, measured pace of someone who has made a decision they are not entirely comfortable with, and is proceeding anyway, because the alternatives are worse. Lena walked beside her. The receiving bay was a high-ceilinged chamber, designed to accommodate incoming delegations of various sizes and species. Its walls were neutral gray. Its floor was open. It had a raised platform at the far end where the station council could position itself for formal proceedings, and 3 large pressure-sealed doors along the left wall that connected to the docking module. By the time Lena and Lys arrived, most of the council was already present. 5 beings, representing the station's major species populations, arranged on and around the raised platform with the particular careful arrangement of people who are very aware that what is about to happen will be important and who want to communicate the right things through their positioning. Lena took a position near the wall, off to one side, not on the platform, not at the front, but visible, in clear line of sight from the docking doors, with nothing between her and the entry point. The wait was 19 minutes. Then the docking doors opened. They came through in a column, 12 Krath warriors in full armor, moving with the smooth coordination of beings who had done this many times in many places and had never once encountered a reason to adjust the routine. They were enormous. Every intelligence file Lena had read, every briefing, every sensor reading and photograph and recorded contact report, none of it had fully prepared her for the reality of them in an enclosed space. The height, the natural plating, the quality of movement that suggested nothing in this room, presented a physical challenge worth calculating. They took their positions along the walls of the bay, 6 on each side, and then the column parted and Captain Vorak came through. He was larger than his warriors. He moved with the complete, unhurried authority of something that does not monitor its environment for threats, because it has never needed to. His compound eyes swept the room in a single slow arc, taking in the council on the platform, the ambassador, the various other beings present, cataloging and assessing with a thoroughness that was entirely without aggression, because it did not need aggression. Then, his gaze reached Lena. It stopped there. She did not look away. He studied her with those compound eyes, the multiple facets of them moving across her face and frame and gear with the same systematic attention he had given the rest of the room, but holding there rather than moving on. She was something he had not expected to see. She could tell that from the quality of his attention, the slight shift in his posture that was not quite uncertainty, but was the physical expression of a mind encountering data that does not fit the existing model. He looked away first, slowly, without acknowledgement, moving his gaze onto the council platform. But he had looked away first. and Lena stored that fact in the same careful place she stored everything she observed. He spoke. The translation system rendered it into the common coalition tongue. I am Captain Vorak. I have come for the quarterly tribute. The station will present its list of available materials within the next 30 minutes. My warriors will conduct an inspection and confirm what is offered. We will depart when the collection is complete. Liz stepped forward from the platform. She was shaking. Lena could see it in the subtle flicker of her luminescence, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. But she stepped forward, and her voice, when she spoke, was steady. Captain Vorak. This station is a Galactic Coalition facility. Our last formal tribute arrangement with the Krath Empire concluded 14 months ago. The terms of that arrangement specified a 17-month interval before any subsequent collection. We are not scheduled for tribute at this time. Vorak looked at her the way a fixed point looks at a question about whether it is really there. The schedule has been revised, he said. Lise held her position. On whose authority? He did not answer immediately. The pause was long enough to communicate something without words. The particular message that very powerful things send when they allow silence to do the work of explaining that the question itself was not really appropriate. On mine, he said. That was when Lena moved. One step forward. Just one. Enough to change her position from someone at the edge of the room to someone in it. Enough to bring herself into the geometry of the encounter in a way that was visible without being aggressive. Vorak's eyes came back to her immediately. She met his gaze and did not break it, and then she spoke. Not in the Coalition common tongue. In Krath. 4 months of self-directed study from recordings and linguistic files, and one very old contact report that had included a partial glossary, all of it compressed into a working vocabulary she had tested in her quarters, in the dead hours when the station was quiet, and she had thought, more than once, that she might be wasting her time on something that would never matter. It mattered now. Captain, she said, in Krath, I would like to speak with you directly before this conversation continues. The room changed when she said it. She could feel the change without looking away from Vorak. The quality of the silence shifted. The collective attention of every being in the receiving bay, which had been oriented toward the council platform and the ambassador, swung toward her like a compass needle, swinging toward a new north. Vorak did not move. His compound eyes were very still. When he spoke in Krath, which meant he was responding to her directly, excluding the translation system, making the exchange a private thing between the two of them, in front of everyone present. You speak my language, he said. Imperfectly, she said. But yes. You are human, he said, not a question. The intelligence files the Krath maintained were apparently comprehensive enough. Yes. He studied her. He was processing something. She could see it in the particular quality of his stillness, the inward focus of something running through a new set of calculations. Why are you here? He asked. This is not a human station. I am the Confederacy's liaison officer, she said. I have been assigned here for 11 months. One human, he said, on an outer rim station. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment, then something moved in his expression. Something very small that she could not have named, but that her instincts recognized as the specific quality of a mind that has decided a situation is more interesting than it initially appeared. Speak, he said. And Lena Ward, Sergeant, Terran Confederacy, 31 years old, and the only human being for approximately 400 light-years in any direction, took a breath and began to change the shape of what was happening in that room. Lena had rehearsed this moment in different forms across 11 months of quiet preparation, but the version she had rehearsed was always approximate, always based on a scenario she had constructed from intelligence files and historical records, and the particular kind of imagination that belongs to people who take threats seriously before they arrive. The actual moment was different from every version of the rehearsal, because the actual moment had Vorak standing 2 meters from her, and the entire weight of the receiving bay tilted toward the next thing she was going to say. She kept her voice level and her breathing even. There is a Terran Confederacy warship on approach to this station, she said, in Krath. I sent an emergency signal before your boarding team arrived. The ship is approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes away at current approach speed. I wanted you to know this before we continued the conversation. The receiving bay was completely silent. She watched Vorok's face. Whatever she had expected, the response she got was not quite it. There was no anger. There was no visible threat. What she saw was something that took her a moment to identify, because she had not seen it in a Krath before, and the intelligence files had not prepared her for it with adequate precision. It was attention. Genuine, focused, recalibrating attention. The kind a mind produces when it receives information that forces it to update its model of a situation. "You sent the signal before my warriors arrived," he said. "I sent it when your ship appeared on our sensors," she said. "Your approach pattern was consistent with a pre-collection arrival. I did not need to wait for confirmation of intent." He was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, his warriors had not moved, but Lena was aware in her peripheral vision of the subtle shift in their collective posture, a quality of readiness becoming something more alert. "Your signal," he said slowly. "It described my ship, its weapons status." "Yes," she said. "And the approach pattern." "Yes. You study us," he said. It was not quite an accusation, and not quite a statement. It was something in between. The tone of something that has discovered it has been observed without being aware of the observation. "I study everything that might be relevant to my assignment," she said. "Your species is extremely relevant to the Outer Rim. So yes, I study you." He looked at her. Those compound eyes moved across her face with a thoroughness she had learned to sit with, rather than react to, the way you learn to sit with the attention of something very large when you have decided that moving would be the worst choice. "What does your ship carry?" he asked. "I do not know its exact current loadout," she said honestly. "What I know is its class designation and its command structure. It is a Confederacy third-class warship. Its captain is an officer named Nora Adler. She is experienced, and she takes her responsibilities seriously." "One ship," he said. "One ship that I know of," she said. "What I transmitted was a broad-spectrum Confederacy emergency alert. That signal reaches more than one receiver." This was true. It was also strategically offered, because the exact propagation of a Confederacy emergency signal was genuinely uncertain from her position on the station, and the possibility that Vorok could not dismiss carried weight that a certainty he could calculate did not. He turned away from her. She had not expected that either. She had expected him to continue the direct engagement, to press on the information she had given him, to try to extract more. Instead, he walked to the center of the receiving bay, and stood there for a moment with his back to her, looking at nothing in particular, and the quality of that pause was so specific, and so different from the performance of power he had been presenting since he came through the docking doors, that it told her something important. He was actually thinking. Not calculating threat response, not preparing a tactical adjustment, thinking in the broader sense, the way a mind thinks when it has encountered a genuinely new piece of information and is trying to find where it fits in the larger picture. She waited. Ambassador Lise had not moved from her position near the platform. The ambassador was watching Lena with an expression that contained several things layered over each other, and the one on the bottom, the one that was hardest to read but most present, looked something like the expression of someone who is watching a person walk a path they did not know existed and finding themselves uncertain whether to follow. Vorok turned around. He looked at the council, then he looked at Lise, then he looked at Lena. "I am going to return to my ship," he said, and he was speaking in the coalition common tongue again, including everyone in the room in the communication. "I will hold my position. You have 4 hours. When those 4 hours are concluded, I will send my boarding team back, and the collection will proceed." He paused. "If your ship arrives before that time, I will want to speak with its captain." He turned toward the docking doors. Lena moved again, not dramatically, 2 steps forward, enough to bring herself into his path without quite blocking it. "Captain Vorok," she said, in Krath, "before you go, I want to say one more thing." He stopped. He looked at her with the careful attention of something that is already decided. This particular being is worth listening to, and is reserving the right to revise that decision at any moment.
"You came here for tribute,"
she said.
"I understand why."
This has been the arrangement in this region for a very long time, and the Krath have maintained it because it has worked, and it has worked because no one has presented a compelling reason for it to stop. I am not telling you the arrangement was wrong. I am telling you that the arrangement was built in a context that has changed. And I want you to think about something specific while you are on your ship for the next 4 hours. He waited. The Galactic Coalition, she said, has 37 member species. Every single one of them has a detailed record of every interaction with the Krath Empire, going back as far as those records exist. Every tribute paid, every collection, every loss. Those records are maintained in Coalition archives. They are cross-referenced and analyzed by the Coalition's diplomatic corps, its strategic planning offices, and its member governments. What happened on this station today, however it concludes, will become part of that record. It will be reviewed by those 37 species and by the governments that represent them, and the record will be read not just as a description of one event on one station, but as a data point in a much larger pattern. She let that sit for a moment. The Krath are very powerful, she continued. That is not in question. What is in question is whether that power is most effectively applied by continuing to operate in a way that is now visible to 37 species with shared records and a growing interest in each other's data. Patterns that were invisible become visible when enough observers share what they see. Vorak looked at her for a long time without speaking. You are telling me, he said slowly, that the risk is not your warship. I am telling you that your warship is the part everyone can see immediately, she said. I prefer to talk about the parts that are harder to see, because those are the parts that produce the largest changes over time. Another long silence. Then he did something she had not predicted, and would not have predicted if she had spent another 11 months preparing. He asked her a question. Not about the ship, not about the signal, not about the carver or the council or the tribute arrangement. He said, "What are humans?" She held his gaze. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, that you are standing in a room full of species that know what the Krath are. They know what we do. They have known it for a very long time, and the knowledge produces a particular response in them that I am familiar with. You do not produce that response. You are standing in this room, speaking my language, telling me things I did not know before I arrived, and you are doing it with the same expression you would use to discuss a technical problem. She thought about how to answer. Humans, she said slowly, come from a world where we were not the largest or the fastest, or the most naturally powerful species. We were somewhere in the middle of the order of things, for a very long time, and we survived that position by being very good at observation, communication, and the creative application of what we learned. We are not built to be apex predators in the physical sense. We are built to study apex predators and find the angles they have not considered. He was quiet. We are also, she said, very stubborn. It is something that the other species who know us have found alternately useful and frustrating. Something moved in his expression again. That same small, controlled movement that she had been trying to categorize from the moment she saw it in the receiving bay. The Krath equivalent of an expression she did not have a precise translation for, but that her instincts were starting to read as something close to reluctant engagement. The response of a mind that has encountered something worth engaging with, and is choosing to do so despite its own expectations. 4 hours, he said, and then he walked through the docking doors, and his warriors filed out behind him, and the doors sealed, and the receiving bay exhaled. Liss was beside her before the sound of the seal had finished echoing. That, the ambassador said, very quietly, was not anything I have seen before. I know, Lena said. He asked you what humans are. Yes. And you told him.
I told him part of it, Lena said, the part that was relevant to this specific conversation.
Liss was looking at her with an expression that had resolved from its earlier complexity into something more singular. It was not exactly approval, and it was not exactly alarm. It was the expression of someone who has just watched a door open that they did not know existed, and who is trying to decide whether to walk toward it. He is going to come back, Liss said. Yes, Lena said. And when he does, either the carver is here, or it is not. Either he has decided something in the next 4 hours, or he has not. But what I know is that the conversation in this room just now was different from what he came here expecting to have, and different conversations produce different outcomes. That is the point. You are not afraid, Liss said, even now. Lena considered the question honestly. I am afraid, she said. I have been afraid since the moment I saw the approach pattern on Olin's sensors. But fear is not a reason to make worse choices. It is a reason to make better ones. Liz held her gaze for a moment. Then the ambassador turned to the council and began the process of organizing the next 4 hours. Lena went back to the sensor room. Olin had expanded the display. The Krath ship was visible on one screen, holding its position at 680 kilometers. The Carver's expected approach vector was projected on a second screen, a dotted line coming in from the outer rim at a steep angle that would bring it into sensor range in approximately 3 hours. Between those two things, the station existed in a middle space that was neither safe nor entirely compromised, a held breath of a situation. He spoke to you, Olin said, without looking up. Yes, for longer than I expected. Longer than I expected too, she said. He turned from his screen and looked at her directly. What did you say to him? She told him, including the part about patterns and records and the Coalition's 37-member species. Olin listened without interrupting, with the complete focused attention the Dreth gave to information they considered important. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You told a Krath captain, he said, that the risk of continuing his current operation was not the warship, but the accumulated documentation of his behavior across 37 observing species. Yes, she said, and he listened. He processed it, she said. Whether he listened, in the sense of allowing it to change something, I will not know until he comes back. Olin returned his gaze to his screens. His fingers moved across the input panels, adjusting things, monitoring things, doing the continuous small work of keeping the station's information systems functioning. When I was young, he said, after a while, I was told something about the Krath. A teacher of mine said that the Krath were like the gravity of a very large object. They did not need to move toward you for their effect to be felt. They simply existed, and their existence bent everything around them. That is accurate, Lena said. Yes, he said. But gravity bends everything, including the path of light, including the trajectory of objects that are moving at sufficient speed in the right direction. He paused. I had not thought about it that way until today. Lena looked at the screens. The Krath ship, patient and still. The projected arc of the Carver, still invisible to the sensors but there, moving. Olin, she said, I need to ask you for something. Yes? The 12 Krath warriors who came aboard, are they still in the docking module or have they moved into the station? He brought up the internal sensor overlay without being asked. The station's layout appeared on a secondary screen, and within it were 12 biosignature readings. Lena looked at their positions and felt the shape of the situation sharpen in her mind. They were not in the docking module. 3 of them were near the environmental control junction. 2 were positioned close to the station's navigational systems access point. 1 was in the corridor adjacent to the primary communications relay. The others were distributed across critical infrastructure points throughout the station's midsection. This had not been spontaneous positioning. This was a plan. They dispersed when Vorak left, Olin said. His voice was very flat, not hiding emotion, the way the Dreth managed things, just the precise communication of information that required flatness to be accurate. How long ago? Approximately 6 minutes after the captain boarded his ship. 6 minutes, which meant the positioning order had been given before Vorak left the bay, while the conversation in the receiving bay was still happening, while he was listening to her. She absorbed this. Vorak was a tactical thinker. He was not choosing between negotiation and action. He was running both simultaneously, keeping one track visible and one track invisible, gathering information on the visible track while the invisible track moved into position. She had underestimated the sophistication of what she was dealing with. That was a correction she needed to make immediately. Can you lock the environmental control junction remotely from here? She asked. I can initiate a partial lock, he said. It will restrict remote access. A physical override is still possible at the junction itself. Initiate the partial lock, she said. Do the same for the navigational system's access point and the communications relay. Every system you can restrict without those restrictions being visible as a lockout, do it now. He was already moving before she finished the sentence. She put her earpiece in and opened the channel to the docking bay sector. No response from the warriors. They were not communicating on any frequency the station could intercept. which told her they were using a Krath internal communication system she did not have access to. She looked at the internal sensor overlay again. The warrior near the communications relay had not moved. The 3 at environmental control were stationary. All 12 were holding position, waiting for an order they expected to come. That order would come either at the end of the 4 hours Vorak had given them, or earlier, if something changed his calculation. She needed to change his calculation before he changed theirs. "Olin," she said, "open a channel to the Krath ship. Direct line to Vorak." He looked at her. "He just left this station 12 minutes ago." "I know," she said. "Open the channel." He opened it. She spoke immediately, in Krath, giving Vorak no time to wonder why she was calling before she told him. "Captain Vorak, I know where your warriors are positioned on this station. I know the systems they are near. I know this was planned before you left the receiving bay." She paused for exactly 1 second. "I am not calling to threaten you. I am calling because I think you are a careful thinker, and careful thinkers consider all the information before they commit to a course of action. I have information you do not have yet. I would like you to have it before the next 4 hours conclude." Silence on the channel for 3 seconds. Then his voice. "Speak. The 12 warriors you have positioned on this station," she said, "are positioned near critical infrastructure. If they act on those positions, the station's life support, navigation, and communications could be compromised in a way that would take weeks to repair fully, even with Dreth engineering on the job. 260 beings are on this station. Not all of them would survive a full systems failure." "I am aware of that," he said. "I know you are," she said. "What I want to be certain you are also aware of is the documentation dimension. If the station's systems are compromised with 260 lives at risk, the incident report that goes to the Coalition Council is not a tribute collection report. It is something with a very different classification, and the response it generates from 37 member species is not the response that a tribute collection generates." Silence. "You are not a being who acts without calculation," she said. "You assessed this station before you arrived. You planned the positioning of your warriors before you entered the receiving bay. You listened to an unexpected speaker for longer than your original plan required, because the unexpected speaker said things worth processing. All of that is the work of a calculating mind. I am asking that calculating mind to run the full set of numbers, including the ones that extend past today." A longer silence. Then Vorak said, "You are the most unusual thing I have encountered in this sector." "I have heard that before," she said. "From whom?" "My commanding officer," she said, "when she posted me here. Something in the channel that might have been, in a different species and a different context, a brief exhalation of something close to amusement." "Your ship will arrive in 3 hours," he said. "Approximately," she said. "Yes. And when it arrives, you expect me to meet with its captain." "I think it would be beneficial," she said. "I think there is a conversation available to you that no Krath captain has had before, because no Krath captain has been in this specific configuration of circumstances before. And I think conversations that have not happened before are the ones worth having." Another long pause. "I will recall 3 of the warriors from their positions," he said. "Not all. 3. Enough to demonstrate that I am processing what you are saying." "That is a beginning," she said. "Do not call this channel again before your ship arrives," he said. "I will contact the station when I am ready." "Understood," she said. The channel closed. Lena sat back in the chair beside Olin's station and looked at the screens. On the internal overlay, 3 of the 12 biosignature readings began to move. They were pulling back from their positions, heading toward the docking module, slowly, deliberately, in a way that was visible to anyone watching the sensors. A signal, not a capitulation, not a retreat. A signal, from one careful mind to another, that the message had been received and was being processed. 3, Olin said. 3, she agreed. 9 remain. Yes. He looked at her. Is 3 enough? She thought about it. 3 is more than I had 20 minutes ago, she said. And the conversation is still open. That is what matters. Outside, the station held its position in space, balanced between a Krath warship and the approaching arc of the Carver, balanced between the 4 hours that had been given and the 3 hours and 11 minutes that remained until help arrived. Inside, 260 beings went about the business of managing fear in the particular ways that different species manage it. Some huddled in shelter areas, some working because work was the only thing that felt like control, some simply waiting in the particular suspended quality of people who know that something large is being decided, and they are not the ones deciding it. Lena Ward sat in the sensor room with Olin and watched the screens, and thought about the 9 warriors still in position throughout the station's infrastructure, and thought about Vorak on his bridge running calculations, and thought about Nora Adler aboard the Carver, pushing engines at maximum approach speed toward a situation she had only a partial picture of. And she thought about what came next. Because the 4 hours would end, the Carver would arrive, and whatever happened in the space between those two events, the situation would resolve into something that could go in several directions depending on choices made by several minds, all of them processing their own versions of incomplete information. The one thing she could do was ensure that the most important of those minds had the best information available. She pulled up her intelligence files and started reviewing everything she knew about Krath tactical decision-making in standoff situations. She had 3 hours. She was going to use all of them. The warrior near the communications relay had not moved in 47 minutes. Lena could see it on the sensor overlay, the dense biosignature reading sitting at the exact same position it had occupied since Vorak recalled the other 3. It was the closest of the 9 remaining warriors to a system that, if compromised, would cut the station off from the Carver's approach signal and from any further outgoing emergency transmissions. She had thought about that warrior specifically, several times, in the 47 minutes since the channel with Vorak had closed. She had thought about what it would mean to remove it from that position without triggering the others. She had thought about what the station's maintenance passage structure looked like from a tactical standpoint, which corridors ran parallel to the main pathways, which access points were unmonitored by the standard sensor grid because they predated the grid's installation and had never been incorporated into the coverage map. She had memorized the gap in coverage 6 months ago, in a period of quiet, when she had been looking for things to learn about the station that most people on it did not know. She decided she needed to move. "Olen," she said, and he was already looking at her before she finished the word, because he had learned in 11 months the specific quality of the silence that preceded her, about to say something that required him to pay close attention. "I am going to walk the station. I need you to keep the 9 remaining positions updated in my earpiece every 5 minutes, or on any change, whichever comes first." He looked at the sensor overlay. The warrior near the communications relay. "Yes," she said. "You are going near it." "I am going to assess it," she said. "I am not going to do anything, unless there is a specific reason." He held her gaze for a moment. "The maintenance passage that runs parallel to Corridor 7 has a sensor gap between junctions 4 and 6, he said. "If you enter at junction 3 and exit at junction 7, you will pass through the gap undetected by the internal grid. The Krath might have their own sensors, but based on the equipment visible when they came through the docking bay, their short-range individual sensor packages are optimized for biological signatures in open spaces rather than enclosed passages." She looked at him. "I read the same technical specifications you read," he said. "I simply had less reason to think about their tactical applications until today." "Thank you," she said. She left the sensor room and moved through the station. The Amber Alert was still cycling at its soft frequency, keeping the civilian population in the shelter areas and out of the corridors. This was useful. An empty corridor was a corridor she could move through without drawing attention or generating sounds that would interfere with her ability to listen. She moved at a pace calibrated between speed and silence, the kind of movement she had spent years training, to the point where it was no longer something she thought about, but something her body did while her mind was available for other things. The other thing her mind was doing was reviewing everything she knew about Krath tactical communication patterns in a multi-warrior deployment. The warriors were not positioned randomly. They were at specific infrastructure points in a pattern that suggested a coordinated action would require a simultaneous command, all 9 acting at once rather than sequentially. That meant there was a trigger signal that had not been sent yet. It also meant that as long as the trigger was not sent, the 9 warriors were holding position, waiting, which made them predictable in a way that moving warriors would not be. Predictable was manageable. She reached Junction 3 and entered the maintenance passage. The maintenance passages of KL7 smelled like recycled air, and the particular metallic undertone of systems that had been running continuously for 30 years without a complete replacement cycle. The passages were narrow, built for access rather than comfort, with exposed conduit running along the walls, and a floor surface that was functional rather than finished. The lighting was minimal, basic operational strip lighting at floor level that was enough to navigate by without being enough to see anything clearly at a distance. Lena did not need distance. She needed proximity and information. She moved through the passage at junction speed, counting her steps, referencing the mental map she had built from the maintenance manuals she had read in her first weeks on the station. The gap in sensor coverage began exactly where Olin had said it would, at junction 4, the specific seam where the original station's sensor grid ended, and the expanded sections grid began, with a handshake problem between the two systems that had never been resolved because resolving it would have required a full sensor overhaul, and the station's budget had never prioritized it. She was glad, not for the first time, that she read maintenance manuals. At junction 6 she slowed. The communications relay access point was on the other side of the wall to her right, a panel-sealed junction that connected the passage to the main relay corridor. Through the wall, she could hear nothing, which was expected. The Krath warriors did not make incidental noise. They did not shift their weight, or scuff their feet, or breathe loudly. They were very still, very quiet, very patient, and that was part of what made them effective. She put her hand flat against the wall and pressed lightly, feeling for any vibration. Nothing. She moved 10 centimeters along the wall and pressed again. Still nothing. She moved another 15 centimeters and felt the faintest suggestion of a pressure differential, so slight that she might have imagined it, but she had trained herself to trust these small signals, and so she stopped and stayed. There was something on the other side of this section of wall. The specific quality of the not-quite vibration she could feel was consistent with a large mass in close proximity, standing still. The warrior was directly on the other side of the wall, approximately 2 meters from where she was standing. She stood there for a moment, in the minimal light of the maintenance passage, one hand on the wall, with a Krath warrior 2 meters away, and 9 minutes left on the 5-minute update cycle from Olin. She was not going to go through the wall. That was not what she was here for. She was here to confirm the position, to assess the warrior's distance from the relay panel itself, and to determine whether there was a way to lock the relay access remotely without a physical approach being necessary. She had what she needed. The warrior was at the wall adjacent to the relay panel, which meant it was not yet interfaced with the system itself. If it had intended to access the relay immediately, it would have positioned at the panel rather than the wall. It was waiting for the order. She moved back toward Junction 3. Olin's voice in her earpiece. Position update. All 9 remain stationary. The warrior near communications relay has not moved. 43 minutes on current timeline. Confirmed, she whispered. I am returning to the hub. She was back in the sensor room 4 minutes later, slightly faster than her outward journey, because she did not need to stop at the wall on the return. She sat down, looked at the overlay, and began working through the specific problem of the communications relay. Can you trigger a maintenance lockout on the relay panel from here? She asked Olin. Not a system lockout, which would be visible as a security measure. A maintenance lockout, the kind that happens during a standard system diagnostic. Olin considered this. A maintenance lockout would restrict physical interface access to the relay panel while appearing to any external sensor as a routine operation, he said. Yes, I can trigger one. It typically runs for 90 minutes before a reset. If someone interfaced with the panel during the lockout, they would get a maintenance in progress signal rather than access. Do it, she said, and do the same for every critical infrastructure panel that a Krath warrior is currently positioned near. Make them all look like routine maintenance operations running simultaneously. He looked at her. Running 9 maintenance diagnostics simultaneously is not a standard operational pattern. It is something a system does after a significant error event, or a scheduled overhaul. Can you make it look like a scheduled overhaul? A pause. I can make the logs show a scheduled overhaul. Whether Vorok's ship, if it is running a detailed analysis of our systems, would accept that explanation depends on how thoroughly their external sensor capability can read our internal logs. What is your estimate? Their sensor packages are impressive, he said. But reading internal operational logs through a station's hull at this distance would require specialized equipment. I do not believe they carry on a standard Predator-class vessel. The capability exists in Krath technical inventory. It is not standard shipboard equipment. Trigger the maintenance lockouts, she said. He did. On the internal sensor overlay, 9 small indicators appeared next to the infrastructure points, where the warriors were positioned, each one showing the maintenance diagnostic signal. The warriors themselves did not move. Whatever they could detect about the station's systems from their physical positions, the maintenance lockout had not triggered a response. Lena let out a breath. Time to Carver arrival? She asked. 2 hours and 54 minutes, at current approach speed, Olin said. She looked at the screens. The Krath ship, patient at 680 kilometers. The Carver's projected track, still invisible on the sensor grid but calculably real. The 9 warriors, stationary throughout the station. And 4 hours, ticking. Or less than 4 hours, if Vorok's calculation reached its conclusion before the deadline. She needed to know where his calculation was. She needed to know whether the conversation she had given him was doing the work she needed it to do, or whether she was watching time run out on a situation she had misread. She did not call the channel again. He had told her not to, and more importantly, she understood why he had told her not to. Calling again before he was ready would signal a lack of confidence in what she had already said, and a lack of confidence in what she had already said was exactly the wrong signal to send. So she waited. 2 hours and 51 minutes. She used the time well. She reviewed every piece of intelligence she had on Krath command psychology, specifically on how Krath captains made decisions in situations that presented them with genuinely new data. The files were less complete on this than she would have liked, because genuinely new data was not something the Krath had been presented with very often, which meant there were few documented examples of how they processed it. But there were some. 3 cases in the Coalition's historical record where a Krath captain in a collection or engagement scenario had encountered something unexpected and had made choices that deviated from the standard tactical playbook. In all 3 cases, the deviation had been toward restraint, not escalation. That was the important pattern. Not restraint as weakness, restraint as the tactical choice of a careful mind that had identified a situation where the cost of action was higher than initially calculated. Vorok was a careful mind. She had established that from the moment he spent more time looking at her than the rest of the room, from the questions he had asked, from the way he had responded to information rather than dismissing it. Careful minds could be reasoned with. She was banking on that. Olen interrupted her at the 2 hour and 12-minute mark with something new. The Krath ship has adjusted its sensor array, he said. The adjustment is toward the approach vector from the outer rim. She looked at the display. He was right. The ship's forward sensor orientation had shifted slightly, toward the direction from which the Carver would arrive. He is watching for the ship, she said. He knows the approximate arrival time from what you told him, Olin said. He is checking the sensor returns. He wants to see it himself when it appears. He is verifying, she said. He is confirming that the ship is real before he fully commits to any particular course of action. Yes, Olin said. I think that is accurate. Good, she said. That means he is still in the calculation phase. He has not committed. The Carver appeared on the sensors at 1 hour and 49 minutes remaining on the 4-hour window. Not as a full clear reading, as a distant return, at the edge of the station's sensor range, a slight thickening of the background signal that the processing system flagged as a probable vessel moving at high speed toward the station. Over the next 6 minutes it resolved into a clearer reading, a definite vessel, the configuration consistent with a Confederacy third-class warship, the approach vector, exactly what the emergency protocols would dictate. Lena felt something release in her chest that she had not been aware of holding. Nora Adler was exactly where Lena had calculated she would be. That meant the additional tactical briefing Lena had added to the initial emergency signal, the one she had sent through Olin in the first hour, had been received and processed. Adler was approaching from the vector that gave her the best tactical positioning relative to the Krath ship's known weapons array orientation. 3 minutes after the Carver appeared on the station's sensors, the Krath ship's communication channel opened. Vorok's voice. Your ship is real. Yes, Lena said. and its captain is approaching from the outer rim side. She is thorough, Lena said. A pause. I want to speak with her. She will want to speak with you, Lena said. I will tell her you are ready to communicate when she is in comfortable range. Yes, he said. And then, the 9 warriors on your station. I am recalling 4 more. That leaves 5 in position. She processed that. You are keeping 5. I am keeping 5, he said, because I am a careful thinker, as you said, and careful thinkers do not abandon all their positions at once in an uncertain situation. That is reasonable, she said. But I am recalling 4, he said, because the conversation you offered me today was not what I came here expecting to find, and careful thinkers also recognize when a situation has produced new data that requires new positioning. I appreciate that, she said. Do not thank me, he said. I have not decided anything yet. I am processing. Understood, she said. The channel closed. On the internal overlay, 4 biosignature readings began moving toward the docking module. That left 5. 5 was still a significant tactical presence, but it was not 9, and the movement itself, the fact of it, was the thing that mattered. It demonstrated something about where Vorok's mind was, about the direction his calculation was moving. Olin watched the 4 signatures track toward the docking module. He is reducing his inside presence, he said. He is signaling, Lena said, to me, and to his own command. He is creating room for a different kind of outcome without committing to it. Is that good? Olin asked. It is better than the alternative, she said. 5 warriors in position is a problem we can manage if the conversation with Adler goes the right way. 9 warriors acting simultaneously on critical infrastructure is a problem we might not recover from in time. She looked at the Carver's return on the sensor screen. Everything depends on the next conversation. The one between Vorok and your captain. The one between Vorok and Adler, she confirmed, and on whether what I have given him in the past 2 hours has prepared him for that conversation in the right way. She opened a direct channel to the Carver. It connected almost immediately, which told her Adler had been expecting the call. Sergeant Ward, the voice that came through was clear and precise, the voice of someone who had been running at full operational tempo since receiving an emergency signal hours ago, and who was now arriving at the situation fully prepared. Situation report. Lena gave it to her. Everything. The Krath ship's position and weapons status. The 12 warriors, now reduced to 5 on station. The conversations with Vorok, including the specific exchange about patterns and documentation, and the 37 member species. The maintenance lockouts on the critical infrastructure panels, the signal Vorok had just sent by recalling 4 warriors, and the tactical information she had included in her supplementary brief, the shield rotation pattern from the 3-year-old scout mission file. Adler listened without interrupting. When Lena finished, there was a brief silence. You've been busy, Adler said. There was a lot to do, Lena said. The shield rotation data, Adler said. You think it is still current? I think the vulnerability was real when it was documented, Lena said. I do not know if it has been corrected since, but I think Vorok, knowing that we have the data, changes the calculation even if the vulnerability no longer exists. Another brief silence. Because knowing we know changes what he has to account for. Yes, Lena said. He cannot assume we are operating blind. Understood. A pause. What is your read on him? Not the tactical read. The personal one. Lena thought about this for a moment. He is not what the standard file describes, she said. He is more complex. He is genuinely calculating, not performing calculation. And he is curious. When I told him what humans are, he listened in a way that was specific. He was not waiting for an opening. He was actually taking the information in. Curious predators are more dangerous and more manageable than incurious ones, Adler said. Yes, Lena said. That is exactly the balance we are working with. All right, Adler said. I am going to hail his ship in 7 minutes. I want you on the channel when I do. I will be here, Lena said. She closed the channel and looked at the sensor screens. The Carver was resolving into a cleaner reading now, close enough for the full configuration to be visible. She could see the gun ports, the sleek functional lines, the scoring on the hull from previous engagements. She could see the approach angle that Adler had chosen, the specific positioning that put the Carver between the Krath ship and the station without pointing weapons directly at the Krath, a stance that was simultaneously protective and non-aggressive. It was exactly what Lena would have done. 2 ships, Olin said quietly, plus this station, 3 points. 3 points make a conversation, Lena said. 2 points make a standoff. The station is what changes the geometry. He considered this. We are the variable that neither ship can ignore. Yes, she said, because whatever either ship does affects us. And affecting us affects how the record reads. And the record is something Vorak now knows he cannot control. On the screen, the Carver held its position. Steady, patient. The particular patience of something that has arrived prepared and is not in a hurry to use what it has brought. 6 minutes and 40 seconds later, Adler opened the channel to the Krath ship. Adler's voice on the open channel was the most direct thing Lena had heard all day, which was saying something, because Lena had been having direct conversations since the moment Vorak's ship appeared on the sensors. Captain Vorak, I am Captain Nora Adler, commanding officer of the Terran Confederacy warship Carver. I am currently holding position at 412 kilometers from outpost KL-7. I have been briefed on the situation by my liaison officer on the station. I would like to have a conversation with you before anything changes. A 10-second silence. Lena counted it. Then Vorak's voice. Captain Adler, you approach from the outer rim side. I approach from the direction that gives me the best tactical positioning, Adler said, not apologizing for it, not explaining it as something other than what it was. You know why. I know you know why. I prefer not to begin a conversation by pretending things are different from what they are. A shorter silence this time. Your liaison officer shares that preference, Vorak said. Yes, Adler said. She is thorough. I have read the message she sent. I want to discuss it with you, specifically the question of what happens after today, Adler said. My officer described it to you in terms of documentation and records, and the attention of 37 coalition species. That is accurate as far as it goes. What I want to discuss is what it means in operational terms. Not for today, for the next decade. Lena watched the sensor readings while she listened. The Krath ship had not changed its orientation. Vorak was listening without preparing a physical response, which was a specific choice. He could have adjusted his weapons orientation while the conversation was happening. He was not doing that. The Krath Empire has maintained its position in the outer rim for 400 years, Adler said, through a combination of genuine military capability and the management of information. Other species have known the Krath are powerful. They have had much less clear information about what the Krath do with that power across the full scope of their operations. Your tribute collection activities, your territorial enforcement actions, your handling of species that decline your collection requests. All of that exists in individual records, held by individual stations and planets and governments, but not systematically cross-referenced. I am aware of the information management, Vorak said. I assumed you were, Adler said. What I am less certain you are aware of is how that situation has changed in the 18 months since humanity joined the coalition. A pause. Explain, he said. Humans, Adler said, are very interested in data. It is a cultural characteristic. We collect information compulsively, across every domain we operate in, and we build systems to organize and cross-reference that information, because we have found, across a very long history, that connected data is exponentially more useful than siloed data. When we joined the coalition, one of the first things our information specialists did was request access to coalition historical archives. They were granted standard access. Within 6 months, our analysts had cross-referenced 40 years of individual station and planet records and produced a comprehensive map of Krath collection activities across the outer rim. Lena had not known this. She filed it, noting that Adler had come to this conversation with information she herself had not had, and was deploying it precisely. That map, Adler continued, exists in multiple copies, held by multiple human institutions, and has been partially shared with several coalition member governments who expressed interest. It is not a threat. It is a fact. The fact is that the picture of Krath operations in the outer rim is now significantly more complete and significantly more widely distributed than it was before humanity joined the coalition. What your empire has managed through information control is no longer fully within your control to manage. A long silence on the Krath channel. Lena watched the sensor readings and thought about the specific quality of Vorok's silence. She had spent enough time listening to him today to begin to read the differences. There were silences that were processing, and silences that were preparing, and silences that were the specific held quality of something encountering information it is taking seriously. This was the third kind. You are telling me, Vorok said slowly, that the information management framework no longer exists in the form we have maintained it. I am telling you that it has already changed, Adler said, not as a threat for the future, as a current condition, today. And today's events on this station will be added to a record that already contains 40 years of data, Adler said. Yes, the addition of today's events to that record is not something either of us can prevent. What we can influence is what today's events are, and therefore what they add to the picture. Another long silence. When Vorok spoke again, his voice had a quality that Lena had not heard before. Not in the receiving bay, not in the channel calls she had made from the sensor room. It was something more careful than anything he had said before. The tone of something that has finished processing, and is now operating from a new model of the situation. What do you want from this conversation, Captain Adler? An agreement, she said. Not tribute, not concession. An agreement between the Terran Confederacy and the Krath Empire, specific to the Outer Rim sector that includes this station. That collection activities will be conducted in accordance with current coalition treaty terms. That means no collection outside of active treaty intervals. No targeting of coalition facilities outside of collection windows. And no positioning of military assets on coalition stations without the consent of the station council. You are asking me to accept coalition law as the framework for Krath operations in this sector, Vorok said. I am asking you to accept that coalition law is already the framework, Adler said. What I am offering is a process for that framework to be acknowledged and formalized, which is considerably less inconvenient than the process of having it enforced. Lena found herself very still in her chair, listening with an attention so complete that she was barely aware of anything in the sensor room except the sound of Adler's voice and the silence on the Krath channel. This was the pivot. This was the exact moment where the conversation either became something new or collapsed back into the pattern it had been following for 400 years.
You are asking me to make this decision unilaterally,
Vorok said.
Without consultation with the Krath command structure.
I am asking you to make a decision that is within your authority as a commanding officer, Adler said. The specific tactical decisions of individual Krath captains in the field are within your authority. I know enough about your command structure to know that. I am not asking for a treaty between governments. I am asking for a decision by a captain, in the field, about how he will conduct operations in a specific sector. That is your call to make. A silence that stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Lena watched the sensor readings. The Krath ship had not moved. The Carver had not moved. The 5 remaining warriors on the station were still in their positions, holding, waiting. If I accept your agreement, Vorok said, and my warriors withdraw from the station, the Carver maintains its distance. The Carver maintains its distance from the moment your warriors begin withdrawing, Adler said, and I personally file a report with the Coalition Diplomatic Council, describing this conversation as a productive engagement, which has its own effect on the record we discussed. A favorable entry in the record, he said. An accurate one, she said. A Krath captain who, when presented with a changed information landscape and a specific proposal, chose to engage rather than escalate. That is what the record will show, because that is what is happening. The channel was quiet. In the sensor room, Lena realized she had been gripping the edge of the console for an unknown period of time. She consciously released her hand. Olin had stopped moving entirely. His panels were running their automated updates, maintaining all the lockouts and systems adjustments he had made across the past several hours. But Olin himself was motionless, listening with the complete focused attention of someone who has understood that the most important thing happening in his area of responsibility is not happening on his screens. Vorok said, I will recall my warriors, all 5. I will hold current position for 40 minutes. In that time, I want the station council assembled, and the specific terms of your proposed agreement transmitted to my ship in written form. If the terms are acceptable, I will depart this station without collection. Agreed, Adler said, immediately, without hesitation, in the way of someone who has already prepared the document and was only waiting to know whether to send it. One more thing, Vorak said. Yes? Your liaison officer on that station, he said. Sergeant Ward, I want her to transmit the document. Not your ship's communications officer. Her, directly. A brief pause from Adler. Why? Because she is the one who gave me the framework for this conversation, he said. And I am a being who acknowledges the source of what is useful. Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not pride, exactly. Something more complicated than pride. A kind of recognition that was not quite comfortable, because it carried weight she had not expected to be asked to carry. Sergeant Ward, Adler said, including her in the channel explicitly. You heard that. I heard it, Lena said. Are you ready to transmit? Give me 3 minutes, she said. She already had the document framework. She had been working from a template in the Confederacy's standard engagement protocols, adapting it to the specific terms Adler had described in the conversation. She made the final adjustments with the precise attention of someone who knows that the language of an agreement is as important as its intent, that the exact words will be read and parsed by people who were not in the room when they were chosen, and that imprecision in moments like this creates problems down the line that cannot always be corrected. She transmitted it at 3 minutes and 15 seconds. On the station's internal overlay, the 5 remaining Krath biosignature readings began to move toward the docking module. All 5. Moving steadily, without hesitation, in the same smooth, coordinated way the warriors had moved in every other directed action they had taken today. Orders received and executed, with the particular efficiency of a highly trained unit that does not question decisions once they have been made. The 5 signatures reached the docking module and held there. Then the docking bay doors opened on the sensor overlay, and the boarding transport that had brought them from the Krath ship returned, and the biosignatures transferred out of the station's sensor range and back to the ship. The station's internal sensor overlay was clear. No Krath biosignatures on KL7. Lena sat back in her chair and let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in hours. The release of tension was physical, a specific relaxation in muscles she had been holding tight across the full span of the past several hours, and it took her a moment to recalibrate to the new quality of the room. Olin was looking at the clean overlay. His expression, insofar as the Dreth expressed things, was doing something that she had learned to read as his version of relief, a slight settling in his posture, a reduction in the sharp quality of his attention. They are gone, he said. From the station, she said. The ship is still there. Yes. He looked at the sensor readings. He is reviewing the document. He will be reviewing it carefully, she said. He said 40 minutes. How likely is it that he signs? She thought about this honestly. He came here to collect tribute. He is leaving without collection. That is a significant deviation from his purpose. But he is also a captain who has just been given a face-saving alternative, a way to depart this situation in a way that is accurately described as a choice he made, rather than something done to him. She paused. I think the document goes back signed. I think there is a better than reasonable chance. But I am not certain. What happens if it does not? Then we are back to 2 ships, and a station, and a captain who has now fully processed the situation and made his decision, she said. And the Carver holds a very good position, and Adler is very good at her job. She looked at the sensor readings. But I think it goes back signed. Olin nodded once, a very small movement. I think so too, he said. They waited. In the shelter areas, 260 beings were in various states of managing a wait they could not end on their own timeline. Some of them had access to the station's information systems and had been following what they could of the situation through the updates that Lise had been distributing at careful intervals. Most of them were working from partial information, and the particular anxiety of partial information, which is often worse than the full picture, because the mind fills in the gaps with whatever it fears most. Lena thought about them, not in an abstract way, not as a number or a category, but as specific individuals, the ones she knew by name, and the ones she knew by face, and the ones she had never spoken to, but had seen in the common area for 11 months. The Sulkai trader who ran the most organized storage section on the station and always had exactly what someone needed immediately. The Valorian family, 3 generations on the station, because the grandparents had arrived in the early commercial days and never left. The young Dreth engineer who had been assigned to the station 6 months ago and who worked alongside Olin with the quiet intensity of someone very early in their career and very aware of it. All of them waiting in shelter areas because of something that had begun on a sensor screen in this room before most of them were awake. 22 minutes into the 40 Vorak had specified, the response came. Not a voice transmission, a document, transmitted through the standard coalition diplomatic channel, the proper protocol for formal agreements between parties. The document was the one she had sent, with 3 minor language modifications, each of which was entirely acceptable within the terms of the agreement, and which she recognized as the work of a careful mind, adjusting the wording at the margins in a way that preserved the substance while adding the particular Krath preference for phrasing that indicated decision rather than concession. And at the bottom, an authorization seal, a Krath captain's seal, which in Krath formal documentation was as binding as any signature, representing the individual authority of the commanding officer and the unit under their command. Vorak had signed. He signed, Olin said, reading the document simultaneously. He signed, Lena confirmed. She transmitted the signed document to the carver in the same moment. Adler's response came back in under a minute. Her own authorization, adding the Confederacy's countersignature to the document, making it formally bilateral. She also included a personal addendum, not part of the formal document, but attached as a separate file, directed to Lena specifically. It said only, "Well done. I will explain the information about the data map when I board the station. It is more complicated than the version I gave Vorak, but the effect was real, and the broad description was accurate. Get some water. You look like you have been on your feet for too long." Lena did not know how Adler could know what she looked like, since there had been no visual component to any of their communication. She decided that it was the kind of thing a good commanding officer says when they know it is probably true, regardless of visual confirmation. She got water from the storage unit by the door. On the sensor screen, the Krath ship's maneuvering thrusters fired in a controlled sequence, beginning the process of rotating the vessel away from the station, not rushing, not in any way that communicated alarm or retreat, moving with the same deliberate, unhurried authority that had characterized everything Vorak did, the movement of something that has made a decision and is executing it. "He is turning," Olin said. "He is leaving," Lena said. "These are different things?" "He is leaving on his own terms," she said. "He is not being pushed out. He is making a choice, and he is making it in a way that the record shows as a choice. That is what he needed from this. That is what made it possible." The ship rotated through the full arc of its departure vector, presenting its rear aspect to the station, and then the main drives fired in a contained burst that produced a clear sensor return. It was moving away, building speed gradually, efficiently, in the direction of the deep outer rim where the Krath Empire's operational zone began. Lena watched it go. She watched it until the sensor return was too faint to resolve clearly, until it was just a diminishing signal against the background scatter, until it was gone. Then she put her water down and opened the station-wide channel. "This is Sergeant Ward. The Krath vessel has departed the station's sensor range. The Amber Alert is being stood down. All personnel may return to normal operations. Station Council to please assemble in the main conference room at your earliest availability. Thank you." She closed the channel. Olin was watching her. "You sound very calm," he said. "I am very calm," she said. And then, because it was true, and because it would have been dishonest to present otherwise, "I am also very tired." "Yes," he said. "That seems appropriate." She looked at the clean sensor screens, the carver, holding its position at 412 kilometers, the empty space where the Krath ship had been, the station's own readings, all systems normal, all infrastructure panels showing clear now that the maintenance lockouts had run their cycles. "The document," Olin said. "What does it actually mean? For the future?" She thought about it. "It means this sector has a formal written record of a Krath captain agreeing to operate within coalition treaty terms. That record is now held by the Confederacy, the station, and the Coalition Diplomatic Archive. It is a specific, signed, dated agreement that did not exist 12 hours ago. And if the Krath ignore it, then the existence of the document makes the violation more visible, more documented, and more significant than a violation of an unwritten expectation would be, she said. It shifts the weight of what comes next. You are saying the document is a beginning, not an ending. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I am saying. He considered this for a long moment. Then he turned back to his panels and began the process of restoring all the station's systems to their standard operational states, methodically undoing each of the adjustments he had made across the day, working with the same precise efficiency he brought to everything, because a system that had been altered for an emergency needed to be carefully returned to its proper state when the emergency was over. Lena watched him work for a moment. Then she went to find Ambassador Lise. Ambassador Lise was not in the conference room. She was not in her quarters, or in the diplomatic offices, or in any of the places Lena expected to find her. After something this large had just concluded, she found her, finally, in the small observation alcove near the station's secondary communication hub, a narrow room with a curved, transparent panel that looked directly out into the space where the Krath ship had been. Lise was standing at the panel, hands folded in front of her, looking at the empty sector. Lena stood at the door for a moment without speaking, reading the quality of Lisa's posture the way she read everything she had spent enough time around. There was something in the set of the ambassador's shoulders that was not grief and not quite relief, something that held both things at a distance while it processed what had just happened. "Ambassador," Lena said. Lise did not turn immediately. She continued looking at the space where the Krath ship had been for another few seconds. Then she said, without turning, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" Lena said. 300 years ago, Lise said, still looking at the empty space, when the Sulkai first encountered the Krath in this sector, our diplomatic council debated for 6 months about the appropriate response. The Krath had made their nature clear very quickly. Their appetite for collection, their willingness to enforce that appetite. The council's debate was not about whether to resist. The resistance option was considered and eliminated in the first week. The debate was about how to minimize the cost of compliance, how to give them enough to keep them satisfied, while preserving enough of what we had to continue functioning. That was a reasonable calculation, Lena said, given what the Sulkai had available at the time. Yes, Lise said, it was. And it has remained reasonable, session after session, for 300 years. Because each time it has been reviewed, the parameters have been the same. The Krath have been here. We have been here. The options have been as they were. She finally turned from the panel and looked at Lena. Her luminescence was doing something complex, cycling through frequencies that Lena had not seen it cycle through before. Today the parameters changed. They changed, Lena agreed. Because you were here, Lise said. Not as an accusation, not as a complaint. As a statement of causality, delivered with the directness of someone who has processed a situation to its actual source, and is willing to name it clearly. Because humanity joined the coalition, Lena said, carefully. I am here because humanity joined the coalition. The Carver arrived because humanity maintains patrol routes in this sector. The data map that Captain Adler mentioned exists because human analysts spent 6 months reviewing coalition archives. None of those things are me specifically. They are what happens when a new variable enters a system. But the conversation happened because of you specifically, Lise said. You are the one who sent the signal. You are the one who spoke Krath in that receiving bay. You are the one who read the maintenance manuals and knew about the sensor gap and locked the infrastructure panels before the warriors could use them. You are the one who called Vorok's ship from the hub and gave him a framework for this situation that he had not previously had. She paused. I want to understand something. Did you know it would work? Lena considered the question honestly. No, she said. I knew it had a better chance of working than any alternative available to us. I knew that the alternative, which was to proceed with the established tribute protocol, had a defined bad outcome that I was not willing to accept when I had the capacity to attempt something different. But I did not know it would work. I thought it was worth trying. Lise was quiet for a moment. That is a very human way to describe a decision. Is it? The Sulkai way, Lise said slowly, is to know, as closely as possible, what will happen before we act. We build consensus. We model outcomes. We do not move until the movement is as close to certain as we can make it. It is why we are very good at negotiation and very bad at improvisation. There is value in both approaches, Lena said. Yes, Lise said. There is. Today I watched an improvised approach produce an outcome that 300 years of careful non-improvisation could not produce. She paused. I am not saying the Sulkai approach is wrong. I am saying I did not know, until today, what the difference looks like when someone has a different one. The difference is risk, Lena said. My approach carries more risk of a bad outcome. Your approach carries less risk of a bad outcome, but also limits the available good outcomes. Both of those things are true simultaneously. Yes, Lise said. I understand that, now in a way I did not fully understand before. She looked at Lena. What I want to know is this. When you walked into that receiving bay this morning, and you spoke to Vorak in his own language, and the whole room went still the way it did, were you afraid? Yes, Lena said. How afraid? Very, Lena said. I could feel it very clearly, which is how I know I was managing it, rather than being managed by it. Fear that you cannot feel is fear that can act on you without your awareness. Fear you can feel is information.
Information,
Lise repeated.
it tells you the situation is serious.
Lena said. Which you already know, but the confirmation is useful. It also focuses attention, which in a situation like this morning's is an asset. The difficulty with fear is not feeling it. The difficulty is in the translation between feeling it and deciding what to do with it. Lise held her gaze. You translated it into standing still. Into standing still and speaking carefully, Lena said. Yes. A long pause. The observation alcove was quiet, the small room holding just the two of them, and the view of the empty space beyond the transparent panel. Outside, the carver was visible if you knew where to look, a distant point of light holding its position against the star field with the patient presence of something that has arrived and is not in a hurry to leave. The council is very upset with you, Lise said. It was not a warning, it was information, delivered with the same factual tone she used for everything. I expected that, Lena said. Reth says you exceeded your authority in multiple specific ways, Lise said. The emergency signal without council authorization, the maintenance lockouts without council direction, the direct communication with Vorak from the hub, the tactical briefing to your captain that included intelligence about the Krath shield system, which Reth says should have been shared with the council before being transmitted. All of those things are accurate, Lena said. He is also, Lise said, deeply relieved that the Krath ship is gone, and will be presenting Sergeant Ward with a formal commendation at the next council session. He is not sure how to hold both of those things at once. Lena almost smiled. Most formal bureaucratic structures have difficulty holding them at once, she said. It is a very common institutional tension. How does your confederacy manage it? Imperfectly, she said. But with a bias toward the outcome over the process. In situations where the two are in conflict, the process exists to serve the outcome. When following the process would have damaged the outcome, adjusting the process is the correct call. That is the principle. In any case, the practice is messier. Lise looked at her for a moment. Then she said, when Captain Adler boards the station, I would like to meet with her and you together. I want to understand the data map she mentioned, the 40-year analysis of Krath collection activities. I will arrange it, Lena said. And there are other station councils in this sector, Lise said. 17 outer rim outposts that face the same position we were in this morning, the same pattern, the same established protocol, the same 400-year assumption. She paused. I think they need to know what happened here today. I was going to suggest the same thing, Lena said. I thought you might be. Lise looked at the space where the Krath ship had been for another moment. Then she straightened, the movement of someone returning from a reflective moment to the operational present, pulling her formal posture back around herself, the way a very experienced diplomat pulls composure on like professional clothing. I should go speak with the council. Reth needs someone to help him hold his contradictory feelings in an organized fashion, and that is usually my function. Thank you, Ambassador, Lena said. Lise paused at the door. For what? For stepping forward in the receiving bay this morning, Lena said. When Vorak first spoke, you were afraid, and you stepped forward and you spoke. That mattered. It told him something about this station that would not have been communicated any other way. He did not dismiss us as helpless because you were not helpless. You were afraid and present. That is a specific and important combination. Lys looked at her for a moment with an expression that was genuinely surprised, in the way of someone who had not expected this specific thing, and was not entirely sure what to do with it. I was shaking, she said. Yes, Lena said, and you spoke anyway. That is the thing that mattered. Lys held her gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded, once, and left. Lena stood in the observation alcove for a while after she was gone, looking at the same empty space Lys had been watching. She thought about the morning, not in the analytical way she had been thinking all day, reviewing options and calculating probabilities and constructing frameworks. She let herself just look at what had happened, the full arc of it, without trying to extract anything from it. A Krath warship had arrived. 12 warriors had come aboard. Vorak had spoken the word tribute, and the room had gone still with a fear 400 years old. She had spoken in Krath, and the room had gone still in a different way. She had made calls she did not have authorization to make. She had locked systems she did not have explicit directive to lock. She had spoken to a Krath captain not once but 3 times. Each conversation a specific tactical choice, each one aimed at a particular part of his decision-making process. And it had worked. Not because she was extraordinary. She was thorough, and she was trained, and she was willing to move when movement was required. But those were not extraordinary qualities. She had met many people in her career who had all of those things. It had worked because the situation had been ready for it to work, in a way it had not been ready before, because humanity had joined the coalition and changed the information landscape, because the Carver existed and was close enough to be relevant, because Olin had been in the sensor room and had made the choices he made, because Lys had stepped forward when she was afraid and spoken, and Vorak had seen that and adjusted something in his assessment, because a lot of things had been true simultaneously and she had been able to use them. She heard the alert from Olin in her earpiece. The Carver was initiating a docking approach. Adler was coming aboard. She left the observation alcove and went to meet her. Captain Nora Adler was not what Lena had constructed from the file. The file was accurate as far as it went. The service record, the commendations, the 6 years of command, the specific operational history of the Carver across a sector that had seen several difficult situations. But files described events and not the quality of a person's presence, and Adler's presence was something that Lena registered in the first 30 seconds of meeting her. She was not large and she was not loud, and she did not project authority as a performance. She projected it as a fact, the same way a very well-maintained piece of equipment projects reliability, through the specific quality of its construction and the way it functions in every detail. She was in her early 40s, with the particular kind of composed attention that belongs to people who have spent a long time in situations where the quality of their attention directly affected outcomes. She shook Lena's hand with a grip that was firm and brief, and moved on immediately, the way experienced people shake hands when there are more important things to do than the handshake. "Sergeant Ward," she said, "the observation deck. I want to look at the space where his ship was while we talk." They went to the main observation deck, a larger version of the alcove where Lys had been standing, with a broader view that encompassed the full sector. The Carver was visible from here, already in docking alignment, a point of structured light moving in the careful pattern of approach. "The data map," Lena said. "Is it real?" "The analysis is real," Adler said. "The 40 years of cross-referenced records are real. The breadth of its distribution is something I described with more confidence than is strictly precise, because the actual distribution is still limited, but the direction of the statement was accurate. Every month we are in the coalition, more data is shared and more analysis is done." "You gave Vorak an accurate but not fully complete picture," Lena said. "I gave him the most persuasive version of a true thing," Adler said. "The thing is true. The persuasive version of it is also true. The precision of the distribution numbers was approximate. That is a distinction I am comfortable with given the stakes." "Yes," Lena said. "I agree." Adler looked at the space where the Krath ship had been. "Tell me about him," she said. "Vorak. You spoke with him more than I did. What is he?" Lena thought about how to answer this accurately. "He is better than the standard Krath captain profile," she said. "Significantly better. He was operating a plan that included positioning warriors at critical infrastructure before the receiving bay conversation was finished, which means he was parallel processing at a level that the standard profile does not fully capture. He was also genuinely curious in a way that went beyond tactical assessment. When I told him what humans are, the specific evolutionary and cultural context for why we behave the way we do, he was taking it in as information rather than as noise. Curious and capable, Adler said. Yes, Lena said, which is why the conversation worked. He had the processing capacity to recognize new data and update his model. A less capable Krath captain might have been predictable in a way that made the situation simpler, but the outcome would have been much worse. Adler nodded. You gave him something he had not been given before. The framework for understanding why this situation was different from every collection he had done before. I tried to, Lena said. And Captain Adler, what you gave him completed it. The data map, the specifics of the Coalition's information architecture, the formal agreement that let him leave with something other than a retreat. You gave him a way to make the right decision that was also, from his perspective, a rational one. Adler looked at her for a moment. We made a good team, she said, for people who have never worked together before. We had compatible frameworks, Lena said. Yes, Adler turned from the view. The agreement Vorok signed. It is specific to this sector and this captain. It is not binding on the Krath Empire or on other Krath captains. You understand that? I understand that, Lena said. It is a start. Starts have limits. The Coalition Diplomatic Council will be very interested in this document, Adler said. They will also be very interested in the circumstances under which it was produced. This is the first time a written agreement between a Krath captain and a Confederacy officer has been produced outside of official treaty negotiations. That precedent is significant, regardless of the document's limited scope. It shows it can be done, Lena said. Exactly. Adler held her gaze. It shows the conversation is possible, and possible conversations have a way of becoming more common once someone has demonstrated that they are possible. They stood for a moment in the quiet of the observation deck, looking at the space where the Krath ship had been, and at the stars beyond it. The ordinary constant stars that did not change regardless of what happened in the small, pressured spaces between them. What happens to this station now? Lena asked. In the short term, the Council files reports, the Confederacy reviews my action log, and your action log, and there is a period of administrative review that will be somewhat tedious but necessary, Adler said. In the medium term, the agreement goes to the Coalition Diplomatic Archive and the Confederacy Strategic Planning Office, and people who think about these things for a living will begin figuring out how to build on it. And in the long term? Adler considered this. In the long term, Sergeant, something changed today, in this sector, in the way the record reads, in the way the beings on this station understand what is possible. That is a different kind of outcome from the one this day could have produced, and it will propagate in ways that neither of us can fully trace from here. She paused. That is how change works. You cannot always see it moving. You can only see where it has been when you look back. Lena looked at the stars. She thought about Olen reading maintenance manuals and finding the sensor gap. She thought about Lise stepping forward with shaking hands. She thought about Vorok turning away from her in the receiving bay and then asking what humans are. She thought about Adler's voice on the channel, direct and prepared, offering Vorok a way to make a decision that was also, from every angle he could observe it, a rational one. None of it had been simple. None of it had been safe. None of it had been guaranteed to work until it did. One more question, Lena said. Yes? The shield rotation data. The 3-year-old scout file. If it had come to a fight, would you have used it? Adler was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, the vulnerability was real when it was documented. I had no way of knowing at approach whether it had been corrected. Using a vulnerability that may or may not still exist is a significant tactical risk. Another pause. Yes, I would have used it, because the tactical risk of not using it was worse. And if it had been corrected, then we would have learned something important about the current state of Krath engineering, Adler said, in an expensive but informative way. There was something very specific about the dry quality of that answer, the precise calibration of it, that told Lena everything she needed to know about how Nora Adler had survived 6 years in command, in a sector this complicated. I am very glad it did not come to a fight, Lena said. So am I, Adler said. In a fight, we probably win. Probably. But winning a fight and winning the situation are different things. Today we won the situation without the fight. That is the better outcome, by a very significant margin. They left the observation deck together. Behind them, through the transparent panel, the stars held their positions in the ordinary dark, patient and permanent, indifferent to what had happened in the pressured space between them, continuing to burn the same way they had been burning since long before any of the species in this sector had developed the capacity to notice them. The station breathed around them, its systems returning to normal operational mode. The amber alert stood down, the shelter areas emptying, as 260 beings emerged back into the corridors and common spaces of their daily lives, moving through the same physical spaces they had been moving through before this morning, with something new, and not yet fully articulated, carried inside them. Something had changed. They all knew that much. The details would come out in the reports, and the council sessions, and the conversations that would happen over the following days and weeks. But the essential thing was already present in the way they moved, in the quality of the air in the corridors, in the particular lightness that comes after something very heavy has been lifted and set down somewhere else. Lena Ward walked through it all, and let it be exactly what it was. The beginning of something. She was good with beginnings. The administrative review that Captain Adler had predicted began the following morning, which gave Lena approximately 9 hours between the Krath ship's departure and the first formal notification from the Confederacy's Outer Rim Command that they wished to discuss the specifics of her decisions during the incident. She spent those 9 hours doing 3 things. The first was sleeping, for 4 hours, in the deep and dreamless way that bodies sleep after they have been running at high operational tempo through something that required everything. She set her alarm for exactly 4 hours, and was awake and functional at the end of them, which was another thing her training had made reliable. The second was writing. Not the formal incident report, which she completed efficiently and with the precise attention to factual accuracy that the format required, but a separate document, personal rather than official, in which she wrote down everything she had observed about Vorak as a specific individual rather than as a representative of his species, his curiosity, the way his assessment shifted when he encountered data that did not fit his existing model, the specific quality of the silence that preceded each of his responses, which was consistently longer when the response required genuine processing rather than retrieval from an established framework, the moment in the receiving bay when he had looked at her before looking at Lise, and the meaning of that sequence, the questions he had asked, and what the specific choice of questions revealed about the gaps in the information he had come in with. She wrote all of this down not because it was required, but because it was the kind of observation that would be lost if she did not put it somewhere stable, while it was still detailed in her memory. Operational adrenaline was an excellent sharpener of detail, but a poor preserver of it. Things that felt permanently inscribed in the immediate aftermath of an experience had a way of softening and blurring within days if they were not captured. She sent the personal document to Adler, with a note saying it was not for formal inclusion, but might be useful for the Strategic Planning Office's understanding of Krath command psychology at the individual level. Adler responded, "Already had the same idea. Compare notes when you have time." The third thing was walking the station, not tactically, not with a mission, just walking, through the corridors and the common areas, and the commercial ring, being visible and present in the spaces where the station's population moved, because the population had spent a long night processing something difficult, and the presence of the person at the center of it mattered in a way that no report or announcement could fully replace. People stopped her, not to challenge her, not to demand explanations for decisions they had not been consulted about. They stopped her the way people stop someone when they need to say something that does not have a precise form yet, something that is still working itself into language. A Sulkai trader, who managed the fuel cell exchange, put her hand on Lena's arm for a moment and said, very simply, "Thank you." One of the Valorian Council representatives, a being named Reth, who had spent the previous afternoon making a case to the council for the specific ways Lena had exceeded her authority, stopped her in the main corridor and held her gaze for a long moment without speaking, and then nodded once, a motion that communicated something more complete than words would have managed. The young Dreth engineer she had noticed before, the one who had been on the station for 6 months, found her in the common area during the morning meal period, He sat down across from her with the directness that characterized Dreth's social interactions and said, without preamble, "I want to ask you something." "All right," she said. "When you were in the receiving bay," he said, "when you spoke to the Krath captain the first time, before you knew whether it would work, what were you thinking?" She thought about it. "I was thinking about the specific words I had chosen," she said. "Whether the vocabulary was correct, whether the pronunciation of the critical phrases was accurate enough to communicate what I intended rather than something adjacent to it. I was thinking about the distance between me and the nearest exit, which I calculated as a habit, the same way I calculate it in any space I enter. I was thinking about the position of his warriors and what the geometry of the room meant in terms of options." The young engineer looked at her. "You were not thinking about whether to speak." "No," she said. "That decision was made before I was in the room." He was quiet for a moment. "How did you make that decision?" "By deciding what kind of person I was going to be in that situation before the situation arrived," she said. "If you wait until you are in the moment to decide whether you will act, you give the moment too much influence over the decision. The decision should happen before the moment, in a time when you are calm enough to think about it clearly. Then when the moment arrives, the decision is already made, and you just have to execute." He processed this carefully, the way the Dreth processed things, thoroughly and without rushing. "You decided before you got to the station," he said. "I decided on my first day on the station," she said. "When I read the incident reports from the previous Krath collection events in this sector, I knew the pattern. I knew it would arrive eventually. So I spent 11 months preparing for it, and when it arrived, I did not have to make the fundamental decision under pressure. I had already made it." He looked at her. "That is an extraordinary amount of preparation for something that might not have happened." "It might not have happened," she agreed. "But the preparation was not wasted if it did not happen. Preparation is never wasted. You become the kind of person who is prepared, regardless of whether the specific event you prepared for ever occurs." He thought about this for a long time. Then he said, "I would like to study your approach more, if that is acceptable." "It is entirely acceptable," she said. "Come find me when you have questions. I usually have time for questions." He nodded once and left. She watched him go, and thought that he was going to be very good at whatever he chose to do with the understanding he was building, and that Kale 7 was lucky to have him. The formal review from Confederacy Outer Rim Command came through at 1100 station time, via a direct channel connection with a senior logistics officer named Grant, a brisk and efficient man who was clearly operating from a script of questions that had been compiled by several people who were not in the channel, but whose presence was felt through the specificity of the questions. He went through the sequence methodically. The signal sent without council authorization, the maintenance lockouts applied without explicit directive, the direct communications with Vorak, including the specific content of what was shared about the Krath shield data, the tactical briefing to the Carver before the ship had received any response from the Outer Rim Command that might have authorized one. He was not hostile. He was not warm. He was precise, which was, she had found, the best quality an administrative reviewer could have, because precision meant you knew exactly what the shape of the inquiry was, rather than having to navigate around implications. She answered every question directly and completely, without qualifications designed to minimize the appearance of what she had done. She had sent the signal without authorization, because the authorization process would have taken longer than the operational window required. She had applied the maintenance lockouts without directive, because the directive process would have required explaining the threat to people who were not in a position to respond to it quickly, which would have produced delay without commensurate benefit. She had communicated directly with Vorak, because she was the person in the room who was prepared for that communication. She had briefed the Carver directly, because she had relevant tactical information that would improve the arriving ship's operational decision-making, and the arriving ship was the asset she needed to be as effective as possible. Grant wrote everything down with the same methodical precision he brought to the questions. When the list was complete, he looked at her through the channel. "Sergeant Ward," he said, "I have been asked to tell you two things from Outer Rim Command. The first is that the specific decision about how to handle the oversight questions you have raised will be made at the command level after review, and you should expect formal communication within 4 to 6 standard days." "Understood," she said. "The second is that Commander Price, head of Outer Rim Operations, asked me to tell you specifically without the content being included in the formal record, that the outcome of yesterday's incident is one of the most significant diplomatic and operational results in the Confederacy's 18 months in the coalition, and that however the formal oversight questions resolve, that is also true, and is also known. She absorbed this. Please thank Commander Price for me. I will do that, Grant said. Is there anything you want to add to the record before we close this session? Yes, she said. One thing. The intelligence file about the Krath shield rotation pattern. The one from the 3-year-old scout mission. It needs to be reviewed and updated. The documentation on that file is extremely limited, and it is not cross-referenced with any current tactical assessment. If there are other similarly underdocumented files in the Outer Rim Intelligence Archive, they should be systematically reviewed. Good intelligence that is not findable is not better than no intelligence. Grant looked at her. I will add that recommendation to the session notes. Thank you, she said. The channel closed. Adler found her afterward in the sensor room, where she had returned partly because it was the space she was most comfortable in on the station, and partly because Olen was there, and there was something specifically comfortable about the presence of Olen, who managed every situation with the same methodical precision, regardless of what the situation was, and who had, over the past 20 hours, demonstrated that this precision extended to moments of genuine difficulty without losing any of its quality. The command review? Adler asked. Routine, Lena said, or as routine as these things are. Grant was precise. The outcome will take 4 to 6 days. In the meantime, Adler said, I would like to have the conversation with you and Ambassador Lease that she requested about the data map and what it means for the 17 other stations in this sector. She will be available whenever you want, Lena said. I think she has been waiting for this conversation since yesterday. They assembled in the station's main conference room, the 3 of them, with Olen present at Lena's specific request, because Olen had been as much a part of what happened as anyone, and because his specific technical knowledge of the station's systems and his understanding of the broader operational context were relevant to what they were going to discuss. Adler spread the data map on the conference room table, not the summary version she had described to Vorak on the channel but the full analysis. 40 years of documented Krath collection events across the Outer Rim, cross-referenced by frequency, by target type, by response patterns from the targets, by outcomes in cases where resistance had been attempted. Liss looked at it for a long time without speaking. The map was not new information, in the sense that the events it documented had happened, and had been known at the time to the stations and planets where they occurred. What was new was the picture that emerged when all of those events were shown together, cross-referenced and compared. Patterns that were invisible from the perspective of a single station, looking only at its own interactions with the Krath over its own operational history, became clear when every station's history was laid next to every other station's history simultaneously. The tribute demands had been escalating, not uniformly, not on a clean trajectory, but in a pattern that was unmistakable when the full data was present. Collections that had averaged a specific value 20 years ago, averaged 30% more 10 years ago, and 50% more than that now. The interval between collections had been decreasing in similar stages. And in cases where a station had attempted to negotiate the terms of a collection, even within the established framework of compliance, the subsequent collection had come earlier than the stated interval. The Krath had been testing limits systematically, not in a conspiratorial, coordinated way that required a central plan. In the organic way that very powerful things test limits when the limits have never pushed back, an incremental expansion of what was possible, because the thing on the other side of the limit was always willing to accommodate. This is a very clear picture, Lease said, looking at the map. Yes, Adler said. The pattern is consistent across every station in the dataset. How many stations have this data? Currently, the full analysis has been shared with 3 coalition member governments, Adler said. The Confederacy has proposed sharing it with all 37 at the next Coalition Council session, which is in 11 days. Liss looked at the map for another long moment. If all 37 member governments have this picture, she said slowly, the nature of the conversation changes. The conversation is already changing, Adler said. What happened on this station yesterday will be in the council session briefing materials. The agreement that Vorak signed will be included. The council will have both the long-term pattern and a specific example of what happens when the pattern is interrupted. By a single person, Lise said, glancing at Lena. By a specific combination of circumstances that included one person who was prepared to act. Adler said carefully. The circumstances were real. The preparation was real. The outcome was real. All of those things can be created intentionally by other stations and other governments, if they have the information and the framework. What framework? Lise asked. It was Lena who answered. The framework is simple, she said. Not easy, but simple. You prepare before the situation arrives, because preparation done inside the situation is always insufficient. You make the decisions about what you will and will not do before you are under pressure to make them. You share information rather than holding it in silos, because connected information is more powerful than isolated information in every situation. And you are willing to have the conversation that changes the context, even when the context seems fixed, because the fixed quality of the context is often a function of nobody having tried to change it, rather than a function of it being unchangeable. Lise looked at her. You make it sound achievable. It is achievable, Lena said. With the right preparation, and the right information, and the right willingness to move when movement is possible. None of those things are easy, but they are achievable. A long quiet in the conference room. Outside the room, the station was returning to its operational rhythms, the normal sounds of a functioning facility, trade and maintenance and communication, and all the small daily work of keeping people alive and organized in a difficult environment. The 17 stations, Lise said. You said you wanted to discuss them. I want to give them the map, Adler said. And I want to propose something. A coordinated information sharing arrangement between the outer rim stations, formalized in a way that lets each station's interaction history be added to the combined record, so that what we can see today grows over time rather than remaining static. A collective record, Lise said. A collective record, Adler confirmed, which changes the information landscape in a way that cannot be reversed, because once the record is shared, the isolation that allowed the pattern to continue without being clearly visible no longer exists. Lise looked at the data map on the table. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she looked up. I will call the 17 station councils, she said. Within the week, I will present the map and your proposal. I cannot guarantee their responses. Each council will decide for itself. That is all we are asking, Adler said. The decision belongs to each council. What we are offering is the information and the framework. And the example, Olin said, speaking for the first time in the meeting. 3 heads turned toward him. He did not appear to notice the attention in any way that changed what he was going to say. The example is also important, he said. The data map shows a pattern. The proposal shows a solution. But what happened on this station yesterday shows that the solution works. In a specific case, in a real situation, under real pressure. That is different from a proposal. That is a proof. Lise looked at him. Then she looked at Lena. Then she looked back at the map. A proof, she said. Yes, that is the right word. They sat with that for a moment. Then Lise stood up, which was the Sulkai signal that a meeting had reached its conclusion, the movement that indicated a decision had been made, and the next phase had begun. I will make the calls, she said. Starting this afternoon. She left the conference room. Olin returned to the sensor hub. Adler looked at Lena across the conference table. The data map spread between them, the 40 years of pattern visible in the cross-referenced points. You know, Adler said, there is going to be a significant amount of attention on this station in the coming weeks. Reports filed, reviews conducted, coalition council interest, and probably a visit or two from people at levels of the Confederacy command structure who do not usually visit outer rim postings. I assumed, Lena said. How do you feel about that? She thought about it honestly. I feel like the attention is less important than what it is about, she said. If the attention produces the right conversations in the right rooms, and if those conversations move the information and the framework to the people who need them, then the attention is doing something useful. If it stops at the level of reviewing whether I followed protocols, it is not. You think it will do the useful thing? I think Lise is already calling the 17 stations, Lena said. I think Olin is already back at his screens, maintaining the systems that keep 260 people alive. I think you already have the next 3 months of patrol routes to plan. And I think the attention will follow whatever direction the people doing the useful things take it. Adler looked at her for a long moment. Then she stood up from the table. Get some more rest tonight, she said. You are going to need it. The next several weeks are going to be very busy. I know, Lena said. Good, Adler said. And then, with the brief and specific quality of someone saying something that means more than the words contain, you did well, Sergeant. She left. Lena sat alone at the conference table for a few minutes, looking at the data map, all those points, all those stations, all those collections and intervals and patterns that had been invisible because they had been isolated, each one thinking its experience was its own, and not part of a picture large enough to see from a single vantage point. She thought about what it meant to give someone a picture they could not have assembled on their own, the specific value of that, the thing it made possible that had not been possible before. Then she rolled the map into its transport container, put it under her arm, and went to find a place where she could look at the stars without anything between her and them, because she had spent a large and pressured day inside the station, and the sensation of enclosed space had accumulated to the point where she needed the opposite. She found it in the observation deck, the main one, and she stood there for a long time, watching the unchanging field of light in the ordinary dark, thinking about the next 11 months and what they needed to contain. More preparation, more maintenance manuals, more files read in the quiet hours about species and systems and the specific mechanics of how things actually worked when they were under stress. More of what she had already been doing. More of what she had, it turned out, been built for. 11 days later, the Galactic Coalition Council session opened, and Outpost KL-7 was on the agenda. Lena watched the session feed from the sensor room, sitting beside Olin in the same position she had occupied during the most pressured hours of the day the Krath ship arrived. The council sessions were transmitted across the Coalition's communication network, available to any station or planet or vessel that wanted to receive them, and Lena had watched portions of previous sessions as part of her ongoing effort to understand how decisions were made at the scale above the one she operated on. This session was different from the ones she had watched before. The agenda item was listed as Outer Rim Incident Report and Policy Discussion, which was the kind of language that disguised the weight of what it contained. The specific weight, as she had been briefed by Adler 3 days earlier, was this. All 37 member species were present. All 37 had received the full data map and the briefing materials that included the KL-7 incident, and the session had been elevated to full council priority by 6 separate government petitions in the 11 days since the incident. 6 petitions, from species that had never previously elevated an outer rim matter to full council priority. The picture had landed. Liz was present at the session, not in the chamber physically but via the diplomatic channel, which allowed Outer Rim Station ambassadors to address the council directly. She had spent the previous 9 days making calls to the 17 other stations as she had promised, and those calls had produced something Lena had hoped for, but had not been certain of. 11 of the 17 stations had asked to join the collective record-sharing arrangement that Adler had proposed. 2 more were in active internal discussion. The remaining 4 had declined for now but had indicated they were watching the situation. 11 out of 17 in 9 days was more than Lena had allowed herself to expect. The council session opened with a formal presentation of the incident report from the Confederacy side, delivered by an officer senior enough to address the council directly. A calm and thorough accounting of everything that had happened, from the moment the Krath ship appeared on the sensors to the moment it departed. The signed agreement between Vorak and the Confederacy was presented as an exhibit. The data map was presented in its full form. 40 years of Krath collection activity across the outer rim, the pattern clear to anyone looking at it for the first time. The council chamber, even through the transmission feed, produced a specific quality of silence when the map was shown. Lena had seen that silence before. She had heard it in the receiving bay when she spoke Krath for the first time, and in the channel, when she told Vorak what the 37 member species shared in their records. It was the silence of something becoming visible that had been present but unseen, the specific silence of a picture assembling into clarity. Liz spoke when the floor opened for station representatives. Her voice through the channel was composed and clear, the voice of someone who has spent 300 years being very good at this specific skill, and who is deploying that skill in service of something that is genuinely different from everything she has used it for before. She described the station, not the incident, which the briefing materials covered. She described KL-7 as a facility, and as a community, the beings who lived and worked there, the daily reality of an outer rim posting in a sector that had been shaped for 400 years by the pattern the map made visible. She described what the morning of the Krath ship's arrival had felt like, from the perspective of someone who had been on stations like this for her entire career, and who had, for the first time, seen the pattern interrupted. She did not describe it dramatically. She described it factually, which was more effective. When she was done, the floor was open for council response, and the response that came was from a direction Lena had not expected. The Valorian representative to the council, an elder named Sorn who had served in that position for 12 years, and who was known across coalition diplomacy for a specific combination of patience and directness, spoke first. He said, "The Valorian people have been aware of the pattern this map describes for 40 years. We have maintained records of our own interactions with the Krath that are substantially consistent with the cross-referenced picture the Confederacy has assembled. We did not share those records previously because we did not have a framework for sharing them that would produce a result. We share them now because a result has been produced and a framework exists." He paused. "I want to acknowledge something that I believe the Council should hear clearly. The result that exists today was made possible by a single human officer on a small outer rim station, who chose to act on a specific morning, when action was available and uncertain, rather than waiting for circumstances that were never going to be more certain. That choice is worth naming, because what it represents is not a property of that individual. It is a property of the approach she took, and the approach can be learned." The chamber was quiet after he finished. Then another representative spoke. And another. The session ran 3 hours past its allocated time, which was, Olin told her, unusual for anything short of a formal treaty negotiation. Lena watched all of it. At the end of the session, the council produced 3 outcomes. The first was the formal acceptance of the collective record-sharing arrangement into the coalition's diplomatic framework, which gave it a formal structure and official support that the initial proposal had lacked. The second was a directive to the diplomatic corps to begin formal outreach to the remaining outer rim stations, with the goal of incorporating their historical records into the shared dataset. The third was a formal request to the Terran Confederacy to provide the intelligence analysis methodology that had produced the data map as a template for how coalition member archives could be cross-referenced going forward. The third outcome was the one that mattered most in the long run, and Lena knew it as soon as she heard it, because methodology was the thing that propagated. Events were singular, methodologies reproduced. When the session ended, she sat in the sensor room for a while with Olin, not speaking, just being in the space where they had spent the most significant hours either of them had experienced in a very long time. The screens showed normal operational data, the quiet business of a station going about its work, nothing flagged, nothing at risk. The council voted, Olin said. "Yes," she said. "Unanimously," he said. It was not quite a question. The vote had been visible on the feed. "Unanimously," she confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. "I did not know the coalition made unanimous decisions on things of this size." "They do not, typically," she said. "It happens when something has made the picture clear enough that the different frameworks that usually produce different votes all land in the same place." "The map," he said. "The map, and the incident, and the conversation that Captain Adler had with the council's briefing staff in the 4 days between the incident and the session," she said. "And Lisa's 9 days of calls to the other stations, and Sorn's statement today, which I did not know was coming, and which I suspect he had been drafting for longer than 9 days." Olin turned from his screens to look at her. Sorn said the approach could be learned. "Yes," she said. "Can it?" She thought about it carefully. "The specific tactical choices I made on that specific morning were a function of specific preparation I had done over 11 months, she said. "Not all of that preparation is transferable in a simple way. But the decision to prepare, the decision to study what was relevant, and know the maintenance manuals, and learn the language, and have the intelligence files ready before the situation arrived, that decision is transferable. The underlying approach is a choice that anyone can make. Anyone who is willing to do the preparation," Olin said. "Yes," she said. "The preparation is the hard part. It requires sustained attention over a long period, often without visible results, often when other things feel more immediately important. Most people, and most institutions, underinvest in preparation Because the benefit is not visible until the moment it is needed, and by the moment it is needed, the time for preparation is past. He considered this carefully. The Dreth invest heavily in preparation, he said. We do not begin any new system, or any new construction, without extensive study of what has been done before, what the failure modes are, what the edge cases require. We consider this the minimum responsible approach to any task. Yes, she said. That is the culture that produced Olen, who was already at his screens monitoring a situation he had identified before anyone else on this station had woken up, and who had the specific technical knowledge to apply maintenance lockouts in a way that looked like routine operations. That preparation was not visible until the morning it was needed. He was quiet. Then, I had not thought of my ordinary work as preparation for something like that morning. Everything is preparation for something like that morning, she said. You just do not know in advance which morning it will be. He looked at his screens, the sensor readings, the communication traffic, the station's systems, all running as they should, all being monitored with the consistent precision that he brought to them every day. I would do it the same way again, he said. So would I, she said. She left the sensor room and walked through the station, the same walk she had done the morning after the incident, through the corridors and the common areas and the commercial ring. The station was different from how it had been 11 days ago, in ways that were not dramatic and not immediately visible, but that she could feel in the quality of the interactions she moved through. People looked at each other differently. The quality of the attention people brought to their conversations had changed slightly, become more direct, in the way that attention becomes more direct when people have recently been reminded that what happens around them is not separate from what happens to them. She stopped at the commercial exchange and bought a meal, because she had not eaten properly in several days of preparation for the council session, and because sometimes the most important thing you can do is eat a meal and be in an ordinary space doing an ordinary thing. The Sulkai trader who ran the exchange, the one who had touched her arm and said thank you the morning after the incident, was working the counter. She did not say anything additional. She put Lena's meal on the counter with the same efficient competence she brought to every transaction, and Lena paid with the same procedure she always used, and the exchange was completely ordinary, in the way that the most valuable exchanges often are. She ate at a small table near the observation port that looked toward the deep outer rim, the direction from which the Krath ship had come, and into which it had departed. The space was empty and ordinary, just stars in the ordinary dark, the same as it had always been. Her earpiece chimed. Adler. The council session, Adler said. I watched it, Lena said. Unanimous. Yes. A brief pause. How are you doing? It was not a question Lena had expected. She had expected operational content, a briefing on the next steps, a discussion of the methodology request from the council. She had not expected this. I am eating, she said. Good, Adler said. That is the right answer. How are you? Lena asked. I am managing the first of what will be many requests from the Outer Rim Command for detailed debriefs on tactical elements of this incident, Adler said. I have been in communications for 6 hours, and I expect to be in communications for several more. I am also eating, in the sense that someone left food near my chair, and I have been consuming it without looking at it while talking. That counts, Lena said. I think so too, Adler said. I wanted to tell you something. It will be in the formal commendation, which is coming, but I wanted to say it before that. All right, Lena said. You did something on that morning, Adler said, that required preparation and judgment and the willingness to move before certainty was available. All of those things are qualities that can be cultivated and trained. But there is one thing you did that I have been thinking about since I read the full incident report, and I am not sure it can be taught the same way. When Vorak looked at you in the receiving bay, before either of you spoke, you held his gaze. You did not look away, and something changed in the quality of that room because you did not look away. Lena thought about that moment, the receiving bay, the 12 warriors, Vorak's compound eyes moving across the room and stopping on her. He looked away first, she said. Yes, Adler said, and you noticed, and you remembered it, and you used it, not by telling him you noticed, not by making it explicit, but by calibrating everything that followed around the knowledge that you had seen something in him that he had not intended to show. That is a very specific skill. It is something I have practiced, Lena said. Most people do not practice it, Adler said. Most people do not know that it is a thing to practice. They think attention is either present or absent. They do not know that the quality of attention is a tool that can be trained like any other. Lena considered this. The beings on this station know it now, she said. Or they are beginning to. Yes, Adler said. That is the thing that matters most about what happened here. Not the specific tactical outcomes, not the document Vorak signed, not even the council session today. What matters most is that the beings on this station, and the beings in 17 other stations who heard about it, and the 37-member governments whose representatives sat in that chamber today, all of them now have a different picture of what is possible. And a different picture of what is possible is the beginning of a different set of decisions. Lena looked at the empty space outside the observation port, at the ordinary stars in the ordinary dark. A beginning, she said. Yes, Adler said, that is what today is. Do not let anyone tell you it is an ending, because it is not, and treating it as one would be the only way to waste it. I know, Lena said. Good. A pause. The Confederacy's Outer Rim Command has a request. Yes? She said. They want you to stay on KL-7, Adler said. Not as a liaison officer. In an expanded role, the station is now the most strategically significant Outer Rim posting in this sector, and it is going to remain that way for the foreseeable future. They want someone there who knows it, and who has demonstrated the judgment to manage what comes from that significance. Lena looked at the empty space outside the observation port for a moment. Then she looked at her meal. When do they need an answer? She said. They would prefer this week, Adler said, but they understand if you need time. I do not need time, she said. No? I decided before I got here, she said. I always decide before I get somewhere. The answer is yes. A brief silence from Adler, then something in her voice that was not quite amusement and not quite warmth but held qualities of both. The Outer Rim is fortunate, she said. The Outer Rim is complicated, Lena said. That is why it suits me. The channel closed. She finished her meal in the quiet of the common area, watching the beings of KL-7 move through their daily work around her. The Sulkai traders and Valorian engineers and Dreth technicians and all the others who made a functional community in a difficult environment at the edge of explored space. They moved with the same patterns they had moved with before this particular morning arrived. They worked and talked and transacted and maintained the ordinary business of living in the same ways. But the morning had happened, and something in the understanding of what was possible had shifted, in ways that would not be visible on any sensor screen and would not appear in any data map, but that were real, in the way that the most important things are always real, below the level of the measurable and the documented, in the quality of how people moved through their days, with a slightly different sense of what those days could contain. She put her tray away and went back to work. There was an outpost to run, a sector to keep informed, and 17 stations whose councils were watching to see what a changed situation looked like when it was taken seriously over time, rather than in a single morning. She was going to show them. That was the plan. That had been the plan since before she arrived. She had just been waiting for the right morning to begin. The right morning had arrived on schedule, the way things arrived when you had done the preparation to recognize them when they came. She walked through the station, through the corridors that had become familiar, and the spaces that had become home, and she carried forward into the next part of the work the same quality of attention she had brought to every part before it, because the work was continuous, and the preparation was continuous, and the willingness to move when movement was required was not a finite resource that got used up in a single significant morning. It was a practice. It was the thing you did every day, in the quiet hours when nothing was happening, so that when something happened, you were already the person who knew what to do. She was already that person. She intended to remain one.